So yesterday in a press conference between Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu and President Trump announced that his plan for a two-state solution is for America to take control of Gaza, for the Arabs of Gaza to be resettled in the Arab world. And what are my thoughts on this? Well, this is the first thing that comes to mind.
If I was born in the Gaza Strip, I was born in the Gaza Strip. Maybe now they will learn their lesson. They rejected every two-state solution. They want to murder all the Jews. But instead, Trump took their land. Born in the Gaza Strip. Gone in the Gaza Strip. Maybe next time, don't try to explode in grocery stores.
So this is Uri Cohen, who's a very funny Israel activist. I saw someone else retweet from the Riviera to the sea. And apparently it's reported that during their meeting, Netanyahu gifted Trump a golden and a regular pager. And Trump reacted by saying, oh, that operation against Hezbollah was incredible. Really, it's like something to behold, really. But I wanted to talk to you on a serious note about what's been suggested here and what Trump is suggesting to do. Because obviously, all the predictable players are outraged by this, and they insist we must have a Palestinian state. And I imagine the average person that looks at this must think, God, this is it's outrageous. It's so radical. But has the current proposed solution, the current conventional wisdom, delivered anything positive or constructive? Before unpacking why this plan for relocation, I think, is clearly the right move, I want to just by starting off as a preamble, show you some of the words that Prime Minister Netanyahu said in his meeting with President Trump in the press conference, because this to me summarizes what Trump is doing here.
You cut to the chase. You see things others refuse to see. You say things others refuse to say. And after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and they say, he's right. And this is the kind of thinking that enabled us to bring the Abraham Accords. This is the kind of thinking that will reshape the Middle East and bring peace.
So that's exactly right. Prime Minister Netanyahu is completely right here. Yeah, people are going to be shocked, jaws are going to drop, and then, you know what? Actually, it may just shift things for the better. Let me try and explain to you why I think this proposal is a good idea. Now, I'm talking about the relocation of people of Gaza. The idea of America coming in and, renovating it and making it an international zone, that to me is a separate topic. And I have mixed feelings about this. But we can talk about the second part of his proposal later on. But I want to just first address the issue of relocating the Arabs of Gaza. It's actually something that I've been proposing, and we've had guests on JTV for a while supporting this idea of relocating the Arabs of Gaza. Let me just explain the case to you for those who find it bizarre, shocking, outrageous, or just unusual. So let's understand the background to this conflict. What is the claim of the Arab side? The Arab side claims that the Palestinian people are indigenous to this land. They have the total rights to the land, and they desire to have self-determination and a state there. Okay, so let's examine this claim in more detail. So this plot of land that we're talking about, if you go back thousands of years, the only sovereign state that ever existed in this plot of land for thousands of years was a Jewish one. There was a Jewish kingdom in this plot of land that was called the Kingdom of Israel and Kingdom of Judah. And this is before Islam existed. This is before Arabs lived in this territory. And then the Jews were conquered. The Jewish kingdom was conquered by the Romans, and they displaced the Jews, even though there was a small Jewish population that maintained a presence in the land. But Jewish people throughout the world prayed every single day to return to the land, and their holy text, the Torah, is centered around the Jewish people's relationship with this land of Israel. From the 7th century onwards, you had the Islamic conquest of the land, and Arabs were living in this plot of land. But they never established a sovereign state there, and the land was taken over by different nations and empires, but no one created their own sovereign state there, distinct identity. Then comes the 20th century. Already the 19th century, you started to see waves of Jews starting to return to the land, not through conquering it and pillaging and stealing land, but by purchasing it through legal means, purchasing the land in this territory. And so by the mid-20th century, you had roughly similar size of Jews and Arabs living in this plot of land. Now, from the mid-1800s onwards, Jews were saying, we want to have sovereignty here. We want to re-establish sovereignty like we did 2,000 years ago. We are the indigenous people. And there was pushback from the Arabs and the Arab leadership. Now, the Arabs could have said, look, we have a case for this land, and the Jews have a case for this land. And so when the world said, we'll split the land in two, they could have said, okay, fine, we'll go with that. The Jews agreed to that, even though you could argue they had a much stronger claim to the land. But they said, no, we acknowledge Arabs have been living here for many, many centuries. And while we have been living here even longer and were displaced from this land, and while there's no sort of claim of a unique national identity from the Arab side that are living in this plot of land, they just consider themselves to be Arabs who are actually indigenous to the Arabian Peninsula. But we'll still accept that we'll split it. And so from the 1930s onwards, the Jews accepted splitting the land into two. The Jews were actually going to, in the 1936 Peel Commission plan, British plan, because Britain had control of the territory at this time, the Jews were just going to have a tiny little portion in the north of the country, and the vast majority of the rest of it would go to the Arabs, and they rejected it. Since then, time after time, they've rejected plans that would basically divide the land 50-50. So, if the thesis is that all they want is just, they consider themselves a unique people who want to have a unique state with their own self-determination, that thesis is clearly demonstrably false, because they have always rejected any offer of self-determination. For those that say, yeah, but it's not fair because they want all of it, that is completely ignoring the history of the Jewish people's connection with the land, the history of anti-Semitism, the fact that clearly the Jewish people deserve a home of their own. And also, it's ignoring the fact that they themselves, the Arabs and the Arab leadership themselves, have been telling us, that they don't actually consider themselves to be distinct from the rest of the Arab world. So, the whole Palestine concept is actually fraudulent. And just a basic study of history will tell you this. If you look at what would have happened in 1948 had the Arabs won, God forbid, had they managed to destroy Israel. The United Nations in 1947 proposed a solution to split the land into two. The Jews accepted, the Arabs rejected, and went to war with Israel. And in 1948, had the Arabs won their war against Israel, if your thesis is, no, these are Arabs who wanted their own state of Palestine because they consider themselves a unique Palestinian people, then what would have happened in 1948 surely would have produced a Palestinian state. But of course, that's not what happened. What happened instead, what would have happened instead, would be this. So Syria would have a chunk of the land, Jordan would have a chunk, Egypt would have a chunk, Lebanon would have a chunk. And so basically, so the theory that they just want their own state is demonstrably false when you look at the fact that there wouldn't be a Palestinian state. All the Arab countries would have a chunk of the land. So then between 48 to 67, Jordan controlled Judea and Samaria, and Egypt controlled Gaza. Was there any calls for Palestinian statehood then? Did they try to set up a Palestinian state in those areas? Nope, no calls for that from either the Egypt or Jordan or the Arabs living in those countries. And then we had, in the 60s, the rise of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which comes up with the flag and the notion of Palestinian peoplehood. But the clue that it was really just a cynical ploy to get rid of Israel rather than a genuine, unique national identity cause is the fact that it said in one of the first clauses of the Palestine Liberation Organization Charter that they consider themselves an inseparable part of the Arab people, of the Arab nation. Well, if that's the case, then how can they consider themselves to see Judea and Samaria and Gaza and, frankly, the rest of Israel as being their rightful homeland if they consider themselves to be Arabs? Arabs are not indigenous to this plot of land. And the fact that they weren't bothered by other Arab countries coming in and taking over the territories or attempting to shows that it's not a genuine national cause, that it's simply the concept of Palestine is a cynical ploy to try and get rid of Israel. Now, this premise was tested once again with Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2005. Because in 2005, Israel said, okay, we'll leave Gaza, we won't occupy this land, and we'll let the Arabs living here have full autonomy. They can have their own little state. And let's see what happens. Let's prove whether they really do want peace and self-determination and all the things they supposedly tell the world. And what happened? Hamas was voted in. And Hamas is not an organization that says, we just want to have statehood and that's all it's about. They call for the killing off of the Jewish state, the killing of Jews. They are based on a modern-day Nazi-esque ideological hatred of Jews, which is what this has always been about, by the way. And what happens over the next 20 years is we have back and forth between Israel and Hamas because they choose death and destruction over life and peace. They choose terrorism and war and bloodshed. And even after October 7th, the worst attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, from Palestinian polling, we see that there is still widespread support for Hamas and what they did on October 7th by the Arabs of both Gaza and Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank as is known. So, if you're looking at this, and you're seeing that for 100 years, the Arab side has been offered statehood and they've rejected it. And whenever they've had some level of autonomy, they've just chosen violence and war. And when they choose to literally massacre, mutilate, abuse, kidnap, rape, torture people simply for the crime of being Jewish or Israeli, or being in Israel at that time, and they support that en masse. Let's be clear, even if you had a cause for self-determination that was legitimate, supporting those kinds of actions that Hamas did demonstrates that they're not interested in the things they claim to be interested in. They're actually just interested in ideological anti-Semitism. So therefore, if the notion of a two-state solution being what they genuinely want is clearly not true, to keep pushing that as a solution is madness. It's insanity. I think what's happened is people simply aren't prepared to face the uncomfortable, inconvenient truth and reality, which is that the majority of the inhabitants, certainly of Gaza, and probably of Judea and Samaria as well, support Hamas, support what they're doing. And therefore, something radical needs to be done. This idea of, well, we've got to go back to giving the Arabs living on both sides in Judea and Samaria and Gaza autonomy again, giving them a state. The notion that that's not going to lead to even worse attacks than October 7th, God forbid, is simply for the birds. But it takes courage to admit that. Now, you're basically left with two options. Option one is that you go down a path that leads to Israel's destruction. And no one that supports truth, morality, history, and decency can support that. So then option two surely has to be to say, enough's enough. You've had 100 years of being offered statehood and showing you have a genuine desire for peace and just self-determination. You've proven that's not what you're interested in. You're just interested in getting rid of Israel. So therefore, it's time to go leave and actually go and live in the part of the world that you yourself consider yourselves to be your home, which is the Arab world. You consider yourselves Arabs. Go live in the Arab world. And as Trump rightly said, this will be better for them. If America can invest in relocating them to a part of the world where they're not going to see themselves as being on the forefront of the Islamist attack against the Jews, then maybe they've actually got a shot of living in peace and dignity. So I think that it's radical, and people are going to, I'm sure, even on some people in the pro-Israel camps will say, oh, well, it's wrong, you can't do this, you can't. Well, what's your alternative? I lament that this has to happen, but what is the alternative? And frankly, it will produce a better life for the people of Gaza. If I was a Gazan, I would want to be moved out of this area, which only knows bloodshed, which only serves the extremists who seek to go to war against the Jews. So Trump is radical, it's out of the box, but it's actually sensible. It's sensible for all sides. I want to read to you what Yaakov Katz said. He said, whatever you think about Trump's announcement, whether you support or oppose it, the key takeaway is his core message. The situation in Gaza cannot continue as it is. The cycle of violence and radicalization must end. Fighting more, destroying Hamas infrastructure, and killing its fighters won't be enough. As long as Hamas remains, Gaza's people will be radicalized. Anti-West education will persist, and a new generation will grow up hating Israel and America and plotting to destroy them. Trump is saying this must change. Tactical day-after plans that leave Hamas pulling strings behind the scenes, even with a different front-facing ruler, miss the point. The real challenge is at the foundation in Gaza, the need to de-radicalize the entire place. Moving people out is one way to address this. But the world must internalize the bigger message. The cycle of what Gaza has become must end. Sadly, many still refuse to accept this. Adon Levy made a great point, by the way. So on the BBC, they said, we've just been speaking with journalist Tariq Darlan, who stresses that the people in Gaza, like in all the world, are deeply connected to the place where they were born, raised, and have been living all their lives. Every one of us is deeply connected to our homes. We reject any eviction, he says on the phone from central Gaza. We will stay put in this land even though there is death and destruction. But hold on one second, as Eilon Levy said. I thought that they saw mainland Israel as their home, and they want to return to mainland Israel. Now they say that Gaza is their home? As Eilon Levy pointed out, thanks to Trump, Gazans have finally decided that Gaza is their home and they want to stay there. That means that they're not refugees who are planning to relocate to Israel. So UNRWA can shut down now. Precisely. The hypocrisy is being proved by this. It's the more you just study the conflict, the more you study the deals, the wars, the more you understand the phoniness, the lies of the whole Palestinian cause. This is also another interesting thing. So Saudi Arabia said, we will not have normalization with Israel unless there is a Palestinian state. But Trump was asked about this, and he said this.
Are the Saudis demanding a Palestinian state?
No, they're not. No.
So that's interesting. Is he saying no, they're not? Are they saying one thing to him and one thing differently? Or is Trump denying that they're saying this, even he knows they are? It could be that the Saudis are just saying this because they need to appease their Arab and Muslim populations. Maybe they do mean it. But either way, Trump is being a classic negotiator. By Trump, pulling in the chair for Netanyahu. I think that's a sign of just friendship and respect. And it's really very, very nice to see. It's a really heartwarming video, and it shows that America has a certain regaining of moral clarity, because boy was it a little bit lost over the last few years. So look, it's really interesting times, and to me, the key thing that I have to say is that people that are insisting on the same old strategies and solutions which have clearly failed, I think in some ways they are the extremists now. Because they are... Extremism is when you stick to strongly held beliefs, when it flies in the face of all common sense and reality on the ground. And those calling for the two-state solution, I think, are extreme in that sense, because it's clearly a failed model that just creates more bloodshed and violence. And it's taken a leader with courage to change this. Now, in terms of America taking over Gaza, I'm not sure. Maybe this is part of Trump's negotiation tactic. Maybe it's, it's just the first firing shot in terms of the final outcome. I don't know. But my sense would be that, to be honest, if anyone has a right to the land of Gaza, it should be Israel. Historically, biblically, from a legal perspective, by the way, it just makes sense. The idea of America coming in and being there in the heart of the Middle East, maybe there could be some strategic interest for Israel. I don't know. Maybe it needs further exploring. But I would have thought, actually, that would just seem to be less inflammatory in a way for Gaza to go to Israel, the Jewish people who had sovereignty over that territory thousands of years ago. And that was drawn up as being part of the promised land for the Jewish people, the homeland for the Jewish people, by the British before it was handed over to the UN. And so that's another part that I suppose will need some exploring. Maybe there could be some benefits. I don't know what's going on in Trump's mind exactly. I don't know. But that's, as I say, another part of the deal that can be explored. But I think the key thing, the most important thing, is to get rid of the security threats and the danger. And that is going to have to start with this relocation plan. Because when you've got a population, the majority of whom still support and celebrate October 7th, it's clear to me that this population has blown it in terms of their right to be in this territory. And a radical solution is very much needed. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.